is a technology conference. I'm here to sell you a technology. It's free, it's easy to understand, and almost anyone can use it. The technology of how not to cut down a tree. But why is it so damn hard to make it happen? And that's what I want to talk about today. Oh, this should be up a little bit higher, but it says, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created lots of value for our shareholders. So a bit of background. I grew up in a country called Papua New Guinea. My father is a linguist. Papua New Guinea is one of 13 countries that's still a crown country, meaning the Queen is still officially our head of state. What he didn't like is that the British want to teach everyone English. And Papua New Guinea had 830 languages. And those languages were disappearing year after year as students learned English and then said, but my language doesn't mean anything because the people who speak it aren't educated. So why would I learn a language of uneducated people? So the whole idea was to put languages back in the school and say, hey, your language also is important. And you need to learn your language and also English. So I had the benefit of growing up in the middle of the forest, very deep in the jungle. And when it was time for me to go to school, the planes only came every sort of 2 weeks. So I figured out if I could run away into the forest the day the plane came, I got to miss 2 weeks of school. So that happened a couple of times. And then my mother said, look, enough of this. You're going to have to leave the jungle. You need to be educated and civilized. Those were horrible words. Mixed results, I can assure you, as years pass. But the reason many forests are being destroyed around the world has to do with the concept of externalities. And this is a simple economic concept, which is we're not accounting for many of the negative consequences of our economic activities. And if we accounted for those properly, it's likely we wouldn't even begin with those economic activities. And forest is a classic example of that. I say facetiously, everybody knows how not to cut down a tree, but the fact is, it's really hard to chop down tropical forests. I don't know if you've ever tried it. There are bugs. I've had malaria, I don't know, 150 times. I should have been up on the panel to talk about all the drugs I've tried and failed, and anyway. But it's difficult. So why is it happening? And it's because the value of the wood and the land under the trees is more valuable than the tree left standing. So NGOs grabbed this. So this is a little bit of a story of disruption. But I was going to skip this slide, but I'm going to say it one more time because I'm going to use it because it's so important. But we heard about it with cigarettes today. We heard about it, I think, with another idea. But I'll give you the forest example, and this is a true story. There's a company in Malaysia called Rimbunun Hijau. They log. So up on the top of this hill, they cut down the trees, and the trees go to Malaysia, get processed, and go to China. But it rains a lot in Papua New Guinea, so the soils run off, and they end up in the river. And Bohia, a young kid, drinks the water, and he gets a stomach virus. So his mother buys medicine. GDP goes up the second time, right? She then has to drive him to a hospital. The cost of the truck to take her to her son to the hospital, GDP goes up again. Now, all of this is a negative consequence of an economic activity upstream. But our accounting system says that's all good. The economy is growing, right? So Bohia died. And now she has to pay a second fee to bring him back to the village and to bury him. Again, cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. The GDP goes up, and all there is sadness. So is this really the economic system that we want for the future? One of the eminent economists that propagated this whole economic construct had some interesting things to say. In the long run, we're all dead. True. But the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas, but escaping from the old ones. And for me, this whole concept of business models that ignore all the negative consequences is an idea whose time must end. And forests are a good example of that. Climate is another. So I'm going to flash some climate data for you very quickly. These are parts of pollution that we have in our global atmosphere. Now, why do we have that? Because we treat our atmosphere as a common good, and the externalities, there's no cost associated to them. So everyone can dump because it belongs to everyone and nobody, and people have not been accounting for the cost that all of us suffer as a result of that dumping. Quickly through the data. That's temperature. This gives you a little bit of where those emissions are coming from. I guess there's no laser here, but the top part is fossil fuels, the bottoms are land and soils. Our data isn't that good yet. We don't really know how hard the Earth is working for us. So when we add up all the emissions that are going into the atmosphere and all the ways that the Earth is taking care of this carbon for us, it doesn't add up. The Earth is doing a lot of work for us that we still haven't figured out for free. Another externality that we are not costing. Sea level rise. And I'm going to flash some pictures about that sort of brought all this home to me, but this is an important one for the following reason, because it brings a very important point, that these are delayed reactions. So if you look at sea level rise, in 100 years, it's maybe a meter. Fast forward another century or two, it goes, we're running the risk of 6 meters. So all of you buying beachfront property, if you have plans for your kids to inherit that, I'd say buy something above 42 feet. Because what we don't know is that all those timescales are coming closer and closer to us. So as a small island state, where I grew up from Papua New Guinea, we've been asking for a 1.5 degree limit, not a 2 degree limit. Because we're seeing, and I'll show you some pictures, we're seeing climate change impact us dramatically now. Even at 1 degree, for us another ½ degree is catastrophic, and 2, we don't even know what that means. But if we look at the emissions to date, we may have already crossed that threshold. And according to some other data, we may have a decade or so. So the time to start thinking about these things is now. So where do all these emissions come from? The green one there is the one I'm going to talk about, which is land and forests. It's about 15 to 20% of global emissions. I don't know how many of you have seen the McKinsey curve. I'll just explain it to you again very quickly. So there are many things we can do in our lives where we make an investment and we actually earn an income or a return higher than the investment. So the idea for that would be a low-cost light bulb. You change out an inefficient one, you pay $5, but your cost savings come back to be $20. Those are all these kind of things. But if you add them all up, those take us about 25% of the way we need to go to get to a world that will be sustainable. And the other ones cost money. So it costs money to conserve a forest. Why? We have to overcome the opportunity costs. We have to help the communities move to sustainable livelihoods. And those are costs. And so then the next question is, well, if we invest and we don't make money on it, what are the lowest cost alternatives to help us get there? And that's where some of the dark green numbers are, or blocks. The height is the cost and the width is the carbon. So forests and land are significant and lower cost alternatives. How are we doing? Not well. And that's part of why we're here. And I'll give some analogies to that. So when I was growing up, I was given very explicit lessons on how big a garden could be in the jungle. And the reason was that it has to be of a sufficient size that you can feed your family, but not so large that it won't regenerate and put nutrients back in the soil. So a garden can only be big enough that in 10 years you can come back and garden it again because the forests have repopulated. You can burn them down, use the nitrates, and replant your food. As colonialism kicked in, we started saying, well, your children need to survive, which is a good thing, and you need to be educated, and you need to travel. And so people started having bigger families and needing more land, And now the forests get too big and it just turns into invasive grasslands. So traditionally, we knew exactly how to be sustainable. Then we started asking for more of everything, and now we're starting to figure out that our sustainable practices have been lost. Now this is Regina, and that's Joseph, but the point is, forests are much more than trees. Forests for the community I grew in was life. It was about the spirits, it was about religion, it was about decorations, it was about all of these things. So why am I only talking about the forest? The reason is it's a proxy. If we can keep forest cover original and stable, we protect the animals, we protect the cultures, we protect the people. Okay? If I go in and try to measure the culture, I'll get in a big war with anthropologists. If I go in and get in a fight about the animals, I'll get in a fight which one is more important. But if I just come up with a simple proxy and say, can we just keep the ecosystems as they were and let them exist as they are, let's use that proxy. This tree I remember very vividly. It was a beech, and I used to sit under that tree on the sand. This is just recently, and no one can explain. People have been in Papua New Guinea for about 50,000 years, and they have many legends of history. They have no legend or explanation ever for the coastlines to look like this. Okay? In the last 50,000 years of humans living here, there is no record of anything like this occurring. And that's what happens with climate change. It impacts different areas of the world at different paces. Sea level rise in our area is much higher than it is in the UK. So that's the founding Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, and that's me over there. This is about 2004. The World Bank had given the Prime Minister an ultimatum. He had to stop all of the entire logging in his country, and the World Bank was offering him $50 million. The Prime Minister said, look, I make about $150 million just in royalties from that logging. Per year, a one-time offer isn't going to cut it. So we decided to try to explain to the rest of the world that it takes money and time to stop deforestation and replace it with sustainable industry. We did a quick analysis. At that point in time, there's only one country that had a national plan where they were actually effectively turning back the forest cover in their land. That was Costa Rica. Globally, they control about 0.7% of the world's tropical forests. Papua New Guinea and Costa Rica joined and formed the Coalition for Rainforest Nations. Long story, lots of UN negotiations, lots of discussions. When you see it in the SDGs and all this kind of stuff, this is 15 years of our work to make sure that we're a little stamp in the SDG set of guidelines. This is where we stand today. About 90% of the world's tropical forests are included now in national plans and are prepared to conserve and turn back forest loss in their countries. This is about disruption. I've got 2 minutes. And when we first started, there were 2 data points, which I'm going to get to real quickly. I got to give you a little technological example, though. This is a combination of technology and finance. So we use satellites. This is an old satellite image. It will take a look, and it can start to identify trees. We can track them over time. And we're using satellite imagery to do that. It's hard to see, but you can see those little white boxes. We're taking samples all over the forest, all over the world, and we're tracking how forest is changing. This is a quick example of that. And the framework we've set up is the following. So we take data points from like 1990 for a country's forest cover, 2000 all the way up to 2015. We call that then their reference level. We do a base fit of all that data, and then they get an incentive for the rate at which on a national level they slow their forest loss. And so the incentive goes in to pay them based on their historical and how they're successfully implementing in the future. When we first started, there was about $0.3 billion that had been raised for the last decade on forest cover. Over the last decade, we've ramped that up to $12 billion. We did a study with McKinsey that we need about $25 billion to slow global deforestation by 25%. $25 billion sounds like a big number, but against 110 trillion of capital that has no impact agenda. It's just chasing risk and return. If we can turn some of that into impact-focused finance, we can solve some of these big social problems. I'm going to skip through all this to talk a little bit about the kind of things we've got to do. The things we're working now on is helping countries develop their national greenhouse gas inventory. We want to know all of their forest area. We need to be able to track it in real time. That's where a company like Planet can help. How do we track their forest cover moving forward every quarter? And how do we provide incentives? How do we help them with where are those greenhouse gas emissions coming from? Who owns them? And how is it that we can provide finance to the people who are actually on the ground making it happen? It's not NGOs, largely. It's not international government agencies. It's really about communities, helping them in their own world get the sustainable life and community that they're looking for. Technology is key, new ways to think about finance, and practical tools to help communities implement this that are clear, cheap, and understandable. And then together, ambition. We've got to understand the world that we've created and the future that will occur if we do nothing, and the future we can choose if we change our ways and our economic models. So I ran out. The end.